Part 2 of Lord Tedric by E. Smith. King Fagon and Tedric were standing at a table in the throne room of the palace castle, studying a map. It was crudely drawn and sketchy, this map, and full of blank areas and gross errors, but this was not an age of fine cartography. Tark, first, is still my thought, sire, Tedric insisted stubbornly. 'Tis closer, our lines shorter, a victory there would hearten all our people. Two, 'twould be unexpected. Lomar has never attacked Tark, whereas your royal sire and his sire before him each tried to loose Sarlon's grip, and in failing, but increased the already heavy payments of tribute. Two, in case of something short of victory, hast only the one pass and the great gorge of the Lothar to hold against reprisal. 'Tis true, of course, would leave the marches unheld, but no more so than they have been for 4 years or more. Nay, think, man, Fagon snorted testily. 'Twould fail. 4 parts of our army are of Tark. Thinkest not their first act would be to turn against us and make common cause with their brethren? Two, we lack strength. They outnumber us 2 to 1. Nay, Sarlon first, then perhaps Tark, but not before then. But Sarlon outnumbers us too, sire, especially if you count those barbarian devils of the Devosian steppes. Since Taggad of Sarlon lets them cross his lands to raid the marshes, for a fraction of the loot, no doubt, 'tis certain they'll help him against us. Also, sire, your father and your grandfather both died under Sarlonian axes. True, but neither of them was a strategist. I am. I have studied this matter for many years. They did the obvious. I shall not. Nor shall Sarlon pay tribute merely. Sarlon must and shall become a province of my kingdom. So argument raged, until Fagon got up onto his royal high horse and declared it his royal will that the thing was to be done his way and no other. Whereupon, of course, Tedric submitted with the best grace he could muster, and set about the task of helping get the army ready to roll toward the marshes, some 3.5 hundredths of miles to the north. Tedric fumed. Tedric fretted. Tedric swore sulphurously in Lormarian, Tarkian, Sarlonian, Devosian, and all the other languages he knew. All his noise and fury were, however, of very little avail in speeding up what was an intrinsically slow process. Between times of cursing and urging and driving, Tedric was wont to prowl the castle and its environs. So doing one day, he came upon King Fagon and the Lady Rhoann practicing at archery. Lifting his arm in salute to his sovereign and bowing his head politely to the lady, he made to pass on. "Hola, Tedric," Rhoann called. "Wouldst speed a flight with us?" Tedric glanced at the target. Rhoann was beating her father unmercifully. Her purple-shafted arrows were all in or near the gold, while his golden ones were scattered far and wide, and she had been twitting him unmercifully about his poor marksmanship. Fagon was in no merry mood. This was very evidently no competition for any outsider, least of all Lomar's top-ranking arms master, to enter. "Crave pardon, my lady, but other matters press." "Your evasions are so transparent, my lord. Why not tell the truth?" Rhoann did not exactly sneer at the man's obvious embarrassment, but it was very clear that she, too, was in a vicious temper. "Mindst not beating me, but never the throne? And any arms master who threweth not arrows by hand at this range to beat both of us should be stripped of badge." Tedric, quite fatuously, leaped at the bait. "Wouldst permit, sire?" "No!" the king roared. "By my head, by the throne, by Loser's liver and brain and guts, no. 'Twould cost the head of any save you to insult me so. Shoot, sir, and shoot your best," extending his own bow and a full quiver of arrows. Tedric did not want to use the royal weapon, but at the girl's quick, imperative gesture, he smothered his incipient protest and accepted it. "One sighting shot, sire?" he asked, and drew the heavy bow. Nothing whatever could have forced him to put an arrow nearer the gold than the farthest of the kings. To avoid doing so without transparently missing the target completely would take skill, since one golden arrow stood a bare 3 inches from the edge of the target. His first arrow grazed the edge of the butt and was an inch low. His second plunged into the padding exactly halfway between the king's wildest arrow and the target's rim. Then, so rapidly that it seemed as though there must be at least 2 arrows in the air at once, arrow crashed on arrow, wood snapping as iron head struck feathered shaft. At end, the rent in the fabric through which all those arrows had torn their way could have been covered by half of one of Rhoann's hands. "I lose, sire," Tedric said stiffly, returning bow and empty quiver. "My score is 0." Fagon, knowing himself in the wrong but unable to bring himself to apologize, did what he considered the next best thing. "I used to shoot like that," he complained. "Knowest how I lost my skill, Tedric? 'Tis not my age, surely?" "'Tis not my place to say, sire." Then, with more loyalty than sense, "And I split to the teeth any who dare so insult the throne." "What?" the monarch roared. "By my—" "Hold, father," Rhoann snapped. "A king you, act it." Hard blue eyes glared steadily into unyielding eyes of green. Neither the thoroughly angry king nor the equally angry princess would give an inch. She broke the short, bitter silence. "Say naught, Tedric. He is much too fain to boil in oil or flay alive any who tell him unpleasantnesses, however true. But me, father, you boil not, nor flay, nor seek to punish otherwise, or I split this kingdom asunder like a melon. 'Tis time, yea, long past time, that someone told you the unadorned truth. Hence, my rascally but well-loved parent, here 'tis. Hast lolled too long on too many too soft cushions, hast emptied too many pots and tankards and flagons, hast betted too many wenches to be of much use in armor or with any style of weapon in the passes of the high Umpasseurs." The flabbergasted and rapidly deflating king tried to think of some answer to this devastating blast, but couldn't. He appealed to Tedric. "Wouldst have said such? Surely not." "Not I, sire," Tedric assured him quite truthfully. "And even if true, 'tis a thing to remedy itself. Before we reach the marches, wilt regain arm and eye." "Perhaps," the girl put in, her tone still distinctly on the acid side, "if he matches you, Tedric, in lolling and whining and wenching, yes. Otherwise, no. How much wine do you drink each day?" "1 cup, usually. Sometimes at supper." "On the march? Think carefully, friend." "Nay, I meant in town. In the field, none, of course." "Seest, father?" "What thinkst me, vixen, a spineless cuddle pet? From this minute till return here, I match your paragon young blade, loll for loll, cup for cup, wench for wench. Is that what you've been niggling at me to say?" "Aye, father and king, exactly. For, as you say, you do." She hugged him so fervently as almost to lift him off the ground, kissed him twice, and hurried away. "A thing I would like to talk to you about, sire," Tedric said quickly, before the king could bring up any of the matters just past. "Armor. There was enough of the god metal to equip 3 men fully, and had necks for their horses. You, sire, and me, and Skyro of your guard. Break precedent, sire, I beg, and wear me this armor of proof instead of the gold, for what we face promises to be worse than anything you or I have yet seen. I fear me 'tis true, but 'tis impossible none the less. Lomar's king wears gold. He fights in gold. At needs, he dies in gold. And that was, Tedric knew, very definitely that. It was senseless, it was idiotic, but it was absolutely true. No king of Lomar could possibly break that particular precedent. To appear in that spectacularly conspicuous fashion, one flashing golden figure in a sea of dull iron gray, was part of the king's job. The fact that his father and his grandfather and so on for 6 generations back had died in golden armor could not sway him, any more than it could have swayed Tedric himself in similar case. But there might be a way out. But need it be solid gold, sire? Wouldst not an overlay of gold suffice? Yea, Lord Tedric, and 'twould be a welcome thing indeed. I yearn not, nor did my father nor his father, to pit gold against hard-swung axe, e'en less to hide behind 10 ranks of iron while others fight. But simply 'tis not possible. If the gold be thick enough for the rivets to hold, 'tis too heavy to lift. If thin enough to be possible of wearing, the gold flies off in sheets at first blow, and the fraud is revealed. Hast ideas? I listen. I know not, sire. Tedric thought for minutes. I have seen gold hammered into thin sheets, but not thin enough. But it might be possible to hammer it thin enough to be overlaid on the god metal with pitch or gum. Would swear it so, sire? Aye, my Tedric, and gladly. Just so the overlay comes not off by handsbreadths under blow of sword or axe. Handsbreadths? Nay, scratches or mars, of course, easily to be overlaid again ere next day's dawn. But handsbreadths? Nay, sire. In that case, try, and may great Losir guide your hand. Tedric went forthwith to the castle and got a chunk of raw massy gold. He took it to his shop and tried to work it into the thin, smooth film he could visualize so clearly. And tried, and tried, and tried, and failed, and failed, and failed. He was trying and still failing 3 weeks later. Time was running short. The hours that had formerly dragged like days now flew like minutes. His crew had done their futile best to help. Bendon, his foreman, was still standing by. The king was looking on and offering advice. So were Rhoann and Trice, Skyro and Shillian, and other more or less notable persons were also trying to be of use. Tedric, strained and tense, was pounding carefully at a sheet of his latest production. It was a pitiful thing, lumpy in spots, ragged and rough, with holes where hammer had met anvil through its substance. The smith's left hand twitched at precisely the wrong instant, just as the hammer struck. The flimsy sheet fell into 3 ragged pieces. Completely frustrated, Tedric leaped backward, swore fulminantly, and hurled the hammer with all his strength toward the nearest wall. And at that instant there appeared in the now familiar cage-like structure of shimmering interlaced bars the form of flesh that was Losir the god. High in the air, directly over the forge, the apparition hung, motionless and silent, and stared. Everyone except Tedric gave homage to the god, but he merely switched from the viciously corrosive Devosian words he had been using to the more parliamentary Lomarian. Is it possible, Lord Sir, for any human being to do anything with this foul, slimy, salvy, perverse, treacherous, and generally bedamned stuff? It is, definitely. Not only possible, but fairly easy and fairly simple, if the proper tools, apparatus, and techniques are employed. Losir's bell-toned organ pseudo-voice replied. Ordinarily, in your lifetime, you would come to know nothing of gold leaf, although really thin gold leaf is not required here, nor are gold beaters' skins and membranes and how to use them, nor of the adhesives to be employed and the techniques of employing them. The necessary tools and materials are, or can very shortly be made, available to you. You can now absorb quite readily the required information and knowledge. For this business of beating out gold leaf, your hammer and anvil are both completely wrong. Listen carefully and remember. For the first preliminary thinning down, you take Lomar's army set out at dawn. First, the wide-ranging scouts, lean, hard, fine-trained runners, stripped to clouts and moccasins and carrying only a light bow and a few arrows apiece. Then the hunters. They too scattered widely and went practically naked, but bore the 100-pound bows and the savagely tearing arrows of their trade. Then the heavy horse, comparatively few in number, but of the old blood all, led by Tedric and Skyro, and surrounding glittering Fagon and his standard bearers. It took a lot of horse to carry a full armored knight of the old blood, but the horse farmers of the Middle Marches bred for size and strength and stamina. Next came century after century of light horse, mounted swordmen and spearmen and javelineers, followed by even more numerous creatures of foot-slogging infantry. Last of all came the big wheeled, creaking wagons, loaded not only with the usual supplies and equipment of war, but also with thousands of loaves of bread, hard, flat, heavy loaves made from ling, the corn-like grain which was the staple cereal of the region. Bread, sire? Tedric had asked wonderingly when Fagon had first broached the idea. Men on the march lived on meat, a straight, unrelieved diet of meat for weeks and months on end, and all too frequently not enough of that to maintain weight and strength. They expected nothing else. An occasional fist-sized chunk of bread was sheerest luxury. Bread? A whole loaf each man a day? Aye. Fagon had chuckled in reply. All farmsmen along the way will have ready my fraction of ling, and Shillen will at need buy more. To each man a loaf each day and all the meat he can eat. 'Tis why we go up the Midvale where farmsmen all breed savage dogs to guard their fields against hordes of game. Such feeding will be nosed abroad. Canst think of a better device to lure Taggart's ill-fed mercenaries to our standards? Tedric couldn't. There is no need to dwell in detail upon the army's long, slow march. Leaving the city of Lompor, it moved up the Lotar River, through the spectacularly scenic gorge of the Coast Range, and into the Middle Valley, that incredibly lush and fertile region which, lying between the low Umpasseurs on the east and the Coast Range on the west, comprised roughly a third of Lomar's area. Into and through the straggling hamlet of Bonoi, lying at the junction of the Midvale River with the Lotar. Then straight north, through the timberlands and meadows of the Midvale's west bank. Game was, as Fagon had said, incredibly plentiful, outnumbering by literally thousands to one both domestic animals and men. Buffalo like Lepita, moose like Rolatos, pig like Akchides, the largest and among the tastiest of Lomar's game animals, were so abundant that one good hunter could kill in half an hour enough to feed a century for a day. Hence, most of the hunters' time was spent in their traveling dryers, preserving meat against a coming day of need. On, up the bluely placid Lake Midvale, a full day's march long, and half that in width. Past the chain lakes, strung on the rivers like beads on a string. past Lake Ardo and on toward Lake Middlemarch, and the Middlemarch Castle, which was to be Tedric's official residence henceforth. As the main body passed the head of the lake, a couple of scouts brought in a runner bursting with news. "Ah, thanks, Sarpedion, sire. I had not to run to Lompar to reach you," he cried, dropping to his knees. "Middlemarch Castle is besieged. Hurlo of the Marches is slain," and he went on to tell a story of onslaught and slaughter. "And the raiders wore iron," Fagon remarked when the tale was done. "Sarlonian iron, no doubt." "Aye, sire. But how couldst—" "No matter. Take him to the rear. Feed him." "You expected this raid, sire?" Tedric said, rather than asked, after scouts and runner had disappeared. "Aye. 'Twas no raid, but the first skirmish of a war. No fool, Taggart of Sarlon, nor Isian of Devos, barbarian though he is. They knew what loomed, and struck first. The only surprise was Hurlo's death. He had my direct orders not to do battle against any force, however slight seeming, but to withdraw forthwith into the castle, which was to be kept stocked to withstand a siege of months. This keeps me from boiling him in oil for stupidity, incompetence, and disloyalty." Fagon frowned in thought, then went on. "Were there forces that appeared not? Surely not. Taggart would not split his forces at all seriously. 'Tis but to annoy me. Or perhaps they are mostly barbarians, despite the Sarlonian iron. To harry and flee is no doubt their aim, but for Lomarr's good not one of them should escape. Knowest the upper Midvale, Tedric, above the lake?" "But little, sire. A few miles only. I was there but once." "'Tis enough. Take half the Royal Guard and a sentry of bowmen. Cross the Midvale at the ford 3 miles above us here. Go up and around the lake. The upper Midvale is fordable almost anywhere in this season, so stay far enough away from the lake that none see you. Cross it, swing in a wide circle toward the peninsula on which sits Middlemarch Castle, and in 3 days— 3 days will be ample, sire. 3 days from tomorrow's dawn, exactly as the top rim of the sun clears the meadow, make your charge out of the covering forest, with your archers spread to pick off all who seek to flee. I will be on this side of the peninsula. Between us there'll be ground like ling. None shall get away." Fagon's assumptions, however, were slightly in error. When Tedric's riders charged at the crack of the indicated dawn, they did not tear through a motley horde of half-armored, half-trained barbarians. Instead, they struck 2 full centuries of Sarlon's heaviest armor, and Fagon the King fared worse. At the first sight of that brilliant golden armor, a solid column of armored knights formed as though by magic and charged it at full gallop. Fagon fought, of course, fought as his breed had always fought. At first on horse with his terrible sword, under the trenchant edge of which knight after knight died. His horse dropped slaughtered. His sword was knocked away, but afoot, the war axe chained to his steel belt by links of super steel was still his. He swung and swung and swung again, again and again, and with each swing an enemy ceased to live. But sheer weight of metal was too much. Finally, still swinging his murderous weapon, Fagon of Lomar went flat on the ground. End of Part 2.